Hello, I'm Richard Vobes, the Bald Explorer, and I'm having a bit of a day off today rather than running around the countryside. It's time to do a little bit of research. And actually, one of my viewers asked me if I would do something about how I plan the routes for my walks. And I thought, yeah, that's a good idea actually. And of course, it all comes down to maps, and I love maps. Maps are brilliant. Maps give you so much information. Now, some of this may well be teaching people to suck eggs, but there'll be some people obviously who are perhaps new to maps and may be interested in how I do these things. So the first thing I want to say is that whenever I'm going on a walk in the UK, the standard map that anybody is going to reference is an OS map, an Ordnance Survey map. And at some point, I'd like to do a video about how the Ordnance Survey maps came about and why they're so unique to Britain. So an Ordnance Survey map, as you probably know, looks a bit like this. This is an Explorer map, which is a 125,000 view. I forget what, or 250,000 view, but each one has a different scale. So you get ones which are further out and ones which have more detail in. So I'm not going to get too worried about the scale of the maps as such. Great big large format map like this. And when I'm planning the usual off the cuff type of walks, I'm looking at the footpaths which are mentioned on the Ordnance Survey maps, the OS maps, and I try to make a simple circle if possible, or a point A to point B with an idea of how to get back, perhaps in a different way or perhaps the same way to where I've parked. So they're very useful for that sort of thing, and a physical map is handy, but of course there are online maps as well, and I'll come on to that in a second. Now, as you know, I'm currently in my search for Sussex as part of my overall quest for England, following this book, Arthur Stanley's Off the Beaten Track, which was written 100 years ago. And the great thing about the book is it's got all these illustrations and what have you in it. And it's curious because he takes us to places, but he's quite vague on the route. And so that makes it a bit of a detective work, and I quite like that. So you can see that when he says I took the left-hand turn at such and such, and then I went down, and he'll miss out a huge load of information, which you then start to think, okay, I can see where he started and I can see where he went. There's a number of footpaths, and which one did he take? And that's always quite interesting. This was written 100 years ago, so I'm curious to see what's changed in that time and whether the footpaths that he took are still in existence, because some footpaths do disappear, and it's very important that we do try and keep as many of the footpaths that there are intact. And I think that the Ramblers Association are trying to get people to make notes of footpaths that are not mentioned on the OS maps that you've come across, which are still open, and get them registered so that they do go back on the maps. So it's very, very important. Excuse me, drinking my coffee at the same time. So I want to have a look at some historical maps. And there's lots of different websites which will show you different history maps. But the one that I like to use online, and you can search it very simply, is something called side-by-side maps. I'll put the links in the description to these things. I use 3 different techniques to sort of plot a path and have a look at things. So side-by-side maps is great because it does exactly what it says. On one side of the screen, you've got the modern world and the modern situation, usually a satellite image. And then on the other side, you have a historical map, which gives you what it looked like at certain periods of time. And you can select the the map that you want, the different period of time. Now, I have found that the best maps for me are the ones that are, I think there's something like 1888 to 1913, or similar time to 1914. There's two which give you a good amount of close-up. And again, I think it's the scale is just so usable, and you can zoom in and hunt around. Now, the thing about the old maps is they're quite clean in terms of how much detail is on there. So whereas a modern OS map is trying to give you so much detail, the older ones perhaps don't give you so much detail, but they give you stuff which have been missing now or deemed unnecessary on the more modern maps. And you'll often see reference to remains of, or old manor house here, or more information about it. And in 100 years, you know, some of that has changed. Routes of old railway lines, or railway lines that are in existence then, in 1914, for example, that the Beechings cut is no longer there. So you can see instantly the changes that have taken place. So I absolutely love that. So that's really handy. Now, what I then like to do is to cross-reference that, and I'll use Bing Maps, bingmaps.com, because Bing Maps, and one of the options is to give you an OS map. Now, not all the time have I got the physical map, or not all the time have I got the different scales of that map. And so the great thing is, if you're sitting at the computer and you're doing this, you can compare in one tab the historical maps of 100 years ago or whatever, and then you can go and get the OS map and go, look, here is today's footpath, and it might be marked in green, as they tend to be. And then on the historical map, you can see where it's got marked a footpath, and there may be extra footpaths, and you think, oh, I see. He took that footpath, but it's no longer a footpath now, or they've diverted the route and it goes in a different way. So those sort of things are really handy, and I cross-reference that. The other thing that I'll use is Google Maps, and I'll use very much the satellite because it's a little bit more up to date, and also the street view, so that you can follow the footpath on the ground before I even go there. And one of the reasons I like to do that is I often have to find somewhere to park, and you'll see a footpath and you'll think, oh yeah, that leads up to this monument, whatever it is. What's the parking like? And it's very tricky when you turn up on the day and you haven't looked to see where to park, and you find actually there's no way. The grass verge isn't big enough, or it's dangerous, or it's not permitted to park there. So and sometimes, you know, the OS maps nearest car park is miles away, but by going on the street view you can think, oh yeah, there is actually some sort of lay-by, not a man-made lay-by, but there's enough room on that verge by that gate, and it's not so far to get back, and I don't have to block the farmer in, and all those sort of things, which of course is very useful. You don't want to get the farmers upset. And then I can trace how I'm going to get to the place I'm going to go, and obviously being a satellite, you can have a look overhead and think, oh yeah, that's interesting. And it may then make me think, actually I could approach it from that side rather than this side, knowing that I'm likely to be out filming in the morning, and that the sun will be coming from the southeast, coming round to the south, because I'm always trying to think, where is the sun going to be, and am I going to have it straight into my face, or into the lens rather, which is more important. So they're the three main services I use, and it's so good. And the thing with Bing Maps, one of the things I do like, is you can actually measure the distance. Now I'm sure other maps do this, but you can work out if you're doing a circular route, or how far is it from here to there. You can measure the distance and go, oh okay, it's 3 miles, that's okay. But if it suddenly turns out to be 15 miles, and you think, oh, 15 miles, I've got to walk back to get my car, that's quite a way, isn't it? So in the current series of Off the Beaten Track that I'm following, I've left myself in Poynings, which is just north of the Devil's Dyke. and he makes his way to Fulking and then to Edmonton, which is the destination of the chapter 4, I think it is, in the book that I'm following this particular walk. And the route, he says, he just goes along the main road, which back then would have been a dusty track, and it's actually quite boring. And when you're making a video, you're trying to find things that are of interest. So I thought, is there another route that's parallel that might be more interesting? So of course I go straight to the maps and I'll have a look and see it. Well, in this case there isn't. I mean, the only parallel one really is on the South Downs Way, right on the top of the ridge of the Downs, which I could do, but I think having come down off the Downs, that's not quite the same. So then I'll start looking, are there interesting things that he doesn't mention and has missed that might be within 2 or 3 miles of that route, just to have a diversion to make the video a bit more interesting. So that's where a map is really useful. And I see on one it says the remains of an old manor house. Now chances are there's nothing to see, and it's on private land because there's no footpath to it. But I'll have a look on the historic maps just to see if there's any more information, and we'll take it from there. So maps, I find, are absolutely fascinating. They give you so much detail. Obviously they give you the roads and also the contours, which is great because you can be looking at a map flat and think, oh, it's just from here to here. That's quite boring. But what the contours tell you is whether there's a dirty great hill in the way and that you've got to do a bit of climbing. So they have the information that you may not immediately think about. Anyway, if you fancy one of my mugs, they are available, he says, blatant bit of advertising, on the baldexplorer.com website, and they're quite nice. They've got my logo, which is actually my head. But I will be out and about continuing that walk and many more. So don't forget to follow, like, subscribe, give me a thumbs up if you've enjoyed the video, and follow my progress as I go in search of Sussex and the quest for England. And just to say really that once the COVID-19 precautions are lifted and we are able to go further and stay overnight, and the Airbnbs are open again, and camper vans and caravans, you can actually stay on places, I will start to go to different parts of England rather than just in Sussex. But for the moment, it's great fun exploring this area and doing what we do. So I'll see you out and about on the next one. Thanks so much for watching. Till next time, bye bye. Now then, old manor house remains somewhere here.